The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the trees, casting long shadows across the playground. But 5-year-old Emma barely noticed. She wasn't like the other children who ran and laughed with abandon. She was always a step apart, a quiet observer, her eyes a little too wide as though they had seen more than any child should. She sat alone on the swings, clutching her stuffed bear close to her chest. The toy was well worn, its fur frayed in places, and the stitching on one ear was coming loose. It was her only comfort, the one thing she could hold on to when everything around her felt so unsafe. Behind her, the sounds of happy children filled the air. Laughter, shouts of joy, the rhythmic squeak of the swings as they swayed back and forth. But Emma heard none of it. She was focused only on the bear in her arms. As she turned it over in her small hands, her finger traced the words hastily scrawled on a small piece of paper hidden inside. The note was wrinkled, as if it had been carried around for days. Emma's hands trembled as she read it once more. "Help! She hurts me. Please find me." The words barely made sense to a child of her age, but they were enough. Enough to make her stomach twist in fear. Enough to make her heart race as her eyes darted around the playground, hoping no one would notice the silent plea tucked away inside her toy. Her gaze settled on Officer Max, the canine dog who stood at the edge of the playground with his handler, Officer Harris. Max was a strong, imposing German shepherd, his presence comforting and intimidating all at once. Emma had seen him before, always walking the park with Officer Harris, looking out for the children. Today, though, Emma wasn't just watching him from afar. She had a plan. She had to be brave. She had to trust him. The playground seemed to grow quieter as she slowly approached Max, her footsteps tentative but purposeful. She glanced at Officer Harris, who was distracted by a radio call, his back turned for a moment. It was now or never. "Here you go, Max," Emma whispered, bending down to place her stuffed bear in front of the dog. Her hand trembled as she carefully set it down, the note hidden within. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her face flushed with the mix of fear and determination. Max's nose twitched as he sniffed the toy, his eyes never leaving Emma's. For a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze. The noise of the playground faded away. But then, just as quickly, Officer Harris turned around. He saw Emma kneeling on the ground, the bear placed at Max's feet. "What's this?" he asked, his voice soft but concerned as he crouched down to inspect the toy. Emma didn't answer. She just stood there, her eyes locked on Max, waiting. Officer Harris noticed the faintest tremor in the little girl's hands, the tension in her body. Something wasn't right. His gaze fell on the bear again, and then his expression shifted when he noticed something odd. There, wedged inside the stuffed animal, was a crumpled note. He gently pulled it free and unfolded it, his brow furrowing as he read the simple, heartbreaking message. "Help. She hurts me. Please, find me." Officer Harris's stomach churned. His hand tightened around the note. He knew exactly what this meant, but he couldn't understand why Emma had chosen to trust Max, why she had come to him with this secret. And just like that, everything shifted. Emma wasn't just a child playing on a swing. She was a child in need, a child desperate for help. "Emma," Officer Harris called softly, but she was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd of children. His heart sank. She was gone, and the question now was, where was she going? The note still burned in his hand, its words haunting him. "She hurts me." His mind raced, trying to put the pieces together, but there was no time. Emma's safety was at risk, and Officer Harris wasn't about to let her slip away. Officer Max looked up at him, his eyes full of understanding, and for a moment Harris felt like the dog was silently asking the same question. What now? Harris knew he couldn't do this alone. He had to find Emma. He had to find out who she was and what was happening to this little girl. But first, he had to figure out where to start. Please, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, Heroes for Animals, for more incredible, heartwarming stories like this. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about every child out there who was too afraid to ask for help, every child who thought no one would believe them. Emma's plea was a cry for help, but it was a quiet one, buried inside a stuffed bear. And that's where Officer Harris and Max came in. They would be the ones to listen. They would be the ones to find the truth, no matter how long it took. Harris stood there for a moment, his hand still gripping the note. The playful sounds of the playground filled the air again, but this time it all felt different. It felt wrong. Too much was hidden beneath the surface. Max's ears perked up as he sniffed the ground. It was time to begin. Emma had reached out for help, and now Officer Harris and Max would stop at nothing to uncover the secret she was so desperately trying to share. Officer Harris stood frozen for a moment, staring at the crumpled note in his hand. The playground around him was alive with the usual sounds of children laughing, parents chatting, and the occasional screech of a swing, but to him, it all felt like a distant echo. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the few fragments of information he had. "She hurts me. Please find me." The words were simple, but the weight they carried was enormous. What kind of person could hurt a child? Harris couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his stomach as he folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He had seen his fair share of difficult cases, missing pets, car accidents, even domestic disputes. But this was different. This felt wrong in his gut, and he wasn't about to ignore it. Max, his canine partner, stood beside him, watching intently as Harris moved toward the nearby park bench. The dog's presence was comforting, as always. Max wasn't just a police dog, he was Harris's partner, his best friend. In many ways, they had been through more together than most people realized, from simple drug busts to high-speed chases. But this felt personal. A child was asking for help, and Harris would do whatever it took to answer that call. He scanned the playground, his eyes darting from the swings to the jungle gym. Where had Emma gone? And why had she chosen to approach him, of all people? There was something deeper to this, something he hadn't yet figured out. "Where'd she go, Max?" Harris asked, glancing down at the dog. Max's tail wagged slowly in response, but he didn't move. The dog knew the urgency in Harris's voice. The little girl's sudden disappearance was unsettling. It was like she'd vanished into thin air, swallowed up by the sea of children. But Harris knew one thing for sure. Emma wasn't just another kid playing at the park. She was in danger. He walked back to where he had seen her last, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The playground was still full of energy, but there was a quiet undercurrent now, an unease in the air that hadn't been there before. The note had shaken him, and he was now fully committed to finding out the truth. Harris stopped near the swings, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of Emma. She couldn't have gone far. She had been so close when she handed him the bear. That's when it hit him, the teddy bear. Why had Emma chosen to trust Max with such a personal, secret message? There had to be a reason why she hadn't just handed it directly to an adult. Harris's thoughts spiraled. Was she scared of being overheard? Had she been threatened? The question lingered, heavy and uncomfortable. He bent down and stroked Max's fur, his mind spinning in 1,000 directions. They needed to find Emma, but he had no leads, no idea where to start looking. There were no direct witnesses, no one who had seen the exchange. The playground was too crowded, too chaotic. "Max, find her," Harris ordered. The canine's ears perked up, and he immediately went to work. His nose twitched as he sniffed the ground, his body low to the ground as he followed the trail. Harris walked closely behind, his eyes sharp, scanning every corner of the park. They moved quickly, passing by families enjoying the afternoon and children running around without a care in the world. But for Harris, this was no longer a casual day at the park. This was about a little girl who needed help, and he wasn't going to rest until he found her. Max led him toward the back of the playground, where the trees began to thin out and the park gave way to a small, overgrown path. Harris's heart skipped a beat. Emma had to be nearby. He could feel it in his bones. They followed the path for a few minutes, the air cool and damp with the scent of moss and pine. The quiet was almost eerie, and Harris's unease grew with every step. He had a gut feeling that they were getting closer to something important. Then Max stopped. The dog's nose was pressed to the ground, his body stiff with focus. Harris crouched down beside him, his eyes scanning the area. Max barked once, low and sharp, and Harris followed the dog's gaze. There, just a few feet ahead, was a small pink backpack lying discarded on the ground. Harris's stomach churned as he took a few steps forward. He knelt beside the backpack and unzipped it carefully, knowing it wasn't his to search, but driven by a need to understand. Inside, he found a few children's books, a juice box, and, buried at the bottom, another note. This one was different from the crayon-scrawled plea he had read earlier. It was written in neat, childish handwriting, and it simply said, "I'm scared, please come." Harris's heart dropped. It was from Emma, no doubt about it. The fear in her words was palpable. She was terrified, and she was alone. His hand shook as he folded the note and stuffed it into his pocket. This was it. They were getting closer. But who was hurting Emma, and why hadn't anyone noticed? "Max, let's go," Harris said quietly, his voice determined but tinged with concern. They followed the trail further down the path, now with a sense of urgency that made every step feel like it mattered. But the path seemed to stretch on forever, winding its way deeper into the trees. The peaceful atmosphere of the park had long since faded, replaced by a sense of foreboding that hung heavy in the air. And then, finally, they reached a small, run-down house at the edge of the woods. The paint was peeling from the walls, and the windows were dark and empty. Harris's breath caught in his throat. This was where Emma had been hiding. Before he could knock or investigate further, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a woman, Claire, Emma's stepmother. She looked at him with wide and wary eyes as if she knew exactly why he was here. But her gaze quickly hardened, and her lips curled into a tight, controlled smile. "You're looking for Emma, aren't you?" she said, her voice smooth but laced with something cold. Harris could feel it, the unease, the tension radiating from her. Something wasn't right. Claire stepped aside, her eyes never leaving Harris as she motioned him inside. "Come on in, she's waiting for you." Harris hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering near his gun, but he stayed calm. There was something in the way Claire spoke, something too rehearsed. He couldn't trust her. Not yet. Max growled low in his throat, and Harris shot him a quick look. They were walking into something much bigger than just a missing child. The story was just beginning to unravel, and Harris knew he couldn't stop now. The truth was closer than ever, but the danger was far from over. Emma's life depended on him finding the answers, and he wasn't going to let her down. The air inside the small, dilapidated house felt heavy, suffocating even. The walls, once white, were now cracked and yellowed, and the smell of stale air and something faintly metallic hung in the corners. Harris stood at the threshold, his hand still resting on his gun, but not pulling it out. Yet. There was something about this house, something off, and he needed to keep his wits sharp. Max stood beside him, ears alert, his body tense with the same unease Harris felt. "Come on in, officer," Claire's voice floated back to them. Smooth as glass, but carrying an edge that didn't sit right. She stepped back and motioned toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the house. Harris didn't move at first, his gaze flicking back and forth. Was Emma in there? Why had Claire opened the door like she knew exactly who was at it without hesitation? "Where is she?" Harris asked, his voice firm, not wanting to play games. "She's upstairs," Claire replied, her smile flickering for a moment before she masked it with a practiced ease. "She's been having a quiet afternoon. You should probably talk to her." Harris couldn't help the chill that crawled up his spine. Everything about Claire's behavior screamed wrong. She wasn't nervous, like a mother might be if she had been caught in a lie or caught hiding something. No, she was too calm, too in control, like she had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind. "I'd prefer if I spoke to her alone," Harris said, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't about to be led around like this, not with his gut telling him there was more to the story than Claire was letting on. Claire's eyes flicked for just a moment to the door leading upstairs, then back to Harris. She didn't like it, but after a tense moment, she relented. "Fine," she said with a flick of her wrist, turning toward the staircase. "She's waiting for you." Harris didn't trust her, but he didn't have much of a choice. He couldn't risk Emma being hidden or worse, in danger, because he was second-guessing his every move. He nodded to Max, signaling the dog to stay close as they followed Claire upstairs. The stairs creaked beneath their weight, and Harris couldn't shake the sense that this place had been hiding secrets for far too long. The house wasn't just old, it felt abandoned, as if it had given up on being a home long ago. They reached the top of the stairs, and Claire walked ahead, her steps soft but deliberate. She reached a door at the end of the hall and paused, as if collecting herself. Harris could feel the tension in the air thicken, pressing in on him from all sides. Max's ears twitched as they both stood in the hallway, waiting. "Emma's room," Claire said simply, and before Harris could respond, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room inside was modest, small even for a child. A twin-size bed with a patchwork comforter took up most of the space, and toys were scattered across the floor. A small desk sat against the wall, with a few markers and coloring books haphazardly thrown about. It looked like any other child's room, bright, innocent, and full of life. But there was something wrong. The room felt off. It wasn't just the dullness in the air, it was the silence. Harris stepped in, Max following closely behind, his nose working the air. His ears twitched as he scanned the room. "Emma?" Harris called gently, his voice soft but commanding. He didn't want to startle her, but he needed to know what had been going on. Was she hiding? Was she hurt? A soft rustle came from the corner of the room, and Harris turned to see Emma sitting on the floor by her bed. Her small hands clutched the doll to her chest, and she looked up at him with those big, frightened eyes. It was like looking into the eyes of someone far older than their age, someone who had seen more darkness than they should have. Emma didn't say anything at first. She just stared, her lips trembling. Harris could see the weight of her fear, the way her shoulders sagged under the burden of things no child should ever carry. "Hey there, Emma," Harris said quietly, kneeling in front of her. "I'm Officer Harris and this is Max. We're here to help. You're safe now." Emma didn't speak, but she slowly extended the doll toward him, her hand shaking slightly. Harris took it from her gently, his fingers brushing hers for a moment. The doll was worn, just like the bear she had handed Max earlier. He could feel the weight of it in his hands. But it wasn't the doll that mattered now, it was Emma. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes never left his. "Scared of what, Emma?" Harris asked, his voice soft but insistent. He needed her to trust him. He needed to hear it from her. She looked down at her doll, her fingers tugging at its frayed dress. She hurts me." Emma's voice cracked as she spoke, the words like a soft sob escaping her chest. Harris's heart twisted in his chest. He had known something was wrong, but hearing it from Emma, hearing her say it out loud, made it real in a way he couldn't have prepared for. "She?" He pressed gently, his eyes searching hers. "Who's hurting you, Emma?" Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Harris. The fear was overwhelming, but there was something else in her gaze. A look of recognition, a look of desperation. "Claire," Emma whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. Harris felt his chest tighten. Claire. The woman standing in the other room pretending to be the caring stepmother. The woman who had led him into this house, but now he knew the truth. Claire had been hurting Emma. Harris felt a rush of anger flood through him. How could anyone do this to a child? How could someone hide behind a facade of normalcy while a little girl suffered behind closed doors? His hand clenched into a fist, but he forced himself to calm down. He had to stay focused. Emma needed him now more than ever. He turned to Max, whose keen eyes had been following everything closely, before returning his gaze to Emma. "You did the right thing, Emma," Harris said, his voice low but full of conviction. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here. You're going to be okay." Emma nodded slowly, but the tears in her eyes hadn't stopped. They were quiet, steady, like they had been building up for a long time. Harris stood, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He had enough now to take action, enough to stop Claire from hurting Emma any longer. But there was one more thing, one thing that still didn't sit right. Why had Claire been so calm, so eager to show him Emma? It didn't add up. No mother, or stepmother for that matter, would be so calm in a situation like this. He had to confront her. He had to find out everything. The truth was finally coming to light, but the fight wasn't over yet. "Stay here, Emma," Harris said quietly. "I'll be right back." With one last look at Emma, he turned and headed for the door. Max followed closely, his every step a silent reminder of the promise they had made to the little girl. They were going to make sure she was safe, no matter what. And Claire? Harris was coming for her next. Harris stepped out of Emma's room, his heart still heavy with the weight of what he had just learned. Max stayed close to his side, his usual confident gait now replaced with the careful, measured steps of a dog who could sense his handler's tension. They moved silently down the hallway toward the stairs, and Harris's mind raced. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there was something about this house, something about Claire that didn't feel right. Why had Claire been so calm when he arrived? Why had she allowed him to walk upstairs to talk to Emma without any resistance? It didn't make sense. Every instinct, Harris had screamed that there was more to this than he was seeing. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his boots echoing in the silence of the house. The living room, which had looked so ordinary at first, now seemed more like a stage set, a place where everything was arranged to hide the truth. Claire had played her part perfectly, but Harris had seen through it. He had seen the fear in Emma's eyes, the way her small frame trembled, and it was all he needed to know that something was very wrong here. Max's ears perked up as they reached the door leading to the living room. his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. The dog was on edge, just as Harris was. There was a presence in the room, a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Claire was sitting on the couch, her posture impeccable, as if she were waiting for Harris to return. She looked up at him with that same practiced smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. "Is she okay?" Claire asked, her voice smooth, but there was a slight tremor in it now. It wasn't much, but Harris noticed. "She's fine," Harris replied, keeping his voice even. "She's been through a lot, but she is safe now." He paused for a moment, studying her. He was trying to read her, trying to figure out how much she knew. "I need to ask you a few questions, Claire." Her smile faltered just for a second before it returned with even more force. "Of course, anything. I want to help," she said, her voice so sweet it could have been syrup. But Harris wasn't fooled. He could see it in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also something else. Guilt. Harris took a seat across from her, keeping his distance, but close enough to catch any change in her behavior. He needed her to crack, to show him her true self. "Tell me about Emma's mother," Harris said, his voice low and steady. He needed to see how Claire would respond to this, how much she would reveal. Was she involved in Emma's life before all of this? Claire's expression hardened just slightly. "Emma's mother?" she asked, her eyebrows knitting together. "She left us when Emma was very young, abandoned her, never looked back." Harris didn't buy it. The way Claire spoke of Emma's mother, it was too rehearsed, too controlled. He couldn't help but feel that there was more to the story. "So you've been her only mother figure all these years?" Claire nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Yes, I've raised her as my own. I've tried my best to give her everything she needs." She smiled again, but it was brittle, as though she were trying too hard. "I love her, Officer Harris. I would never hurt her." Harris leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Then why did she say you hurt her?" The room went deathly still. Claire's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked it with a soft laugh. "Emma says a lot of things, officer. She's just a little confused sometimes. Kids make up stories. You know how it is." Harris felt the sharp sting of anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "This isn't just a story, Claire." I saw the fear in her eyes. "I heard her say it, and I'm not going to let this slide." Max growled lowly at Claire, sensing the shift in Harris's mood. Claire's fingers tightened around the armrest of the couch, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. Harris could see it now, the crack in her composure. The guilt was eating her up from the inside. "You're lying," Harris said quietly, his words hanging heavy in the air. Claire's face drained of color, but she didn't back down. She stood up abruptly, her hand resting on the back of the couch for support. "I don't know what you think you're accusing me of, but I've given everything for Emma. Everything. I've done more for her than her real mother ever did. And now you come in here with your accusations? You're wrong." Her voice shook with frustration, but there was something else in her words, a desperation. Harris wasn't sure what she was trying to protect, but he knew it was something big, something she wasn't willing to let go of easily. "Sit down, Claire," Harris said firmly, his voice steady. "I'm not accusing you of anything yet. But I'm getting tired of the games. You're going to tell me the truth. Right now." For a moment there was silence. Then Claire slowly sank back into the couch, her shoulders slumped. The fight in her seemed to drain away, and for the first time Harris saw the cracks in her facade. The walls she had built up to hide her actions, the truth, were crumbling. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know what to do. I tried to be a good stepmother, but she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't behave. I had to make her understand." Harris's blood ran cold. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She had actually admitted it. She had been hurting Emma, and now she was trying to justify it. "I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted her to listen. She made me so angry, and she wouldn't stop crying. She wouldn't stop nagging." Claire's voice wavered, the calm veneer slipping away entirely. Harris sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing what Claire had just said. He had heard of abuse before, but hearing the words come from Claire's mouth, hearing her try to justify the unthinkable, was a whole new level of horror. "Do you realize what you've done?" Harris asked, his voice tight with disgust. "You've broken her. You've crushed her spirit." Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. Harris could see it in her eyes. The truth was staring him in the face. Max growled again, this time louder. Claire flinched, her gaze flicking to the dog before looking back at Harris. I didn't mean it to go this far, Claire repeated, her voice cracking. I couldn't control her. She wouldn't listen. She was so difficult. I just wanted her to obey. Harris's fist clenched. This wasn't just about control. This was abuse. It had been going on for far too long, and Claire had let it spiral out of control. Emma had suffered, and Harris was done listening to Claire's excuses. He stood up abruptly, signaling Max to follow. You're under arrest for child abuse, Claire. You're coming with me. Claire's face went pale, but she didn't resist. She knew it was over. Harris had finally broken through her walls. As he walked out of the house, his mind was still processing the conversation, but one thing was clear. Emma was going to be okay. She was going to be safe. But the road to healing wouldn't be easy. Not for Emma, not for anyone involved. Harris just hoped they could make it right. The sound of the front door slamming behind Harris echoed in his mind as he walked down the narrow, dimly lit hallway. His hands were still trembling, the adrenaline from the confrontation with Claire slowly dissipating. The arrest had been swift, but even now his thoughts kept returning to the same unsettling truth. Emma had been living in fear, trapped in a home that should have been her sanctuary, but instead it had been a prison. Max trotted beside him, the canine's large, imposing frame offering a strange sense of comfort in the midst of everything that had just happened. The dog had always been there for him, but now it felt like Max was more than just a partner. He was a silent witness to the horror Emma had endured. Claire had been arrested without incident, but the anger bubbling beneath Harris's skin hadn't quite been extinguished. He'd never imagined a woman could be capable of what he'd just heard. To justify abuse, to try to manipulate the truth, it made him sick. But there was something more pressing, Sal. He had to focus on Emma. He had to make sure she was okay. When they reached the squad car, Harris opened the door and let Max in. He hadn't heard anything about Emma's father, Frank, yet. Claire had never mentioned him. For all Harris knew, Frank could still be in the dark, completely unaware of what had been happening under his own roof. The thought gnawed at him as he got into the driver's seat. The emotional weight of the case was starting to hit him full force. He didn't have much time to reflect, though. The next step was crucial. He needed to speak to Frank. The man deserved to know the truth. But Harris feared the conversation was going to be far from easy. He took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. Max, sensing his unease, let out a soft growl, his eyes locked on the road ahead. Harris headed toward the outskirts of town where Frank lived. The drive was long, the stretch of empty road only amplifying the heavy silence between him and Max. Harris's mind kept replaying Emma's words, the fear in her eyes, the way she had clutched that doll like it was her only lifeline. What had Frank been doing all this time? Had he known? How could he not have seen the signs? The questions piled up, one on top of the other, and with each mile, they grew heavier. The sun had started to set, casting an amber glow across the fields as Harris pulled into the driveway of a modest ranch. It was quiet here, almost too quiet. The ranch house, a one-story building with a wraparound porch, looked peaceful on the surface. But Harris knew better than to trust appearances. Beneath the calm exterior, there was a storm waiting to break. He parked the squad car and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots as he walked toward the front door. Max, ever vigilant, stayed close to his side, his body tense, ready for whatever might come next. Harris knocked on the door, the sound sharp in the stillness of the evening. It wasn't long before the door creaked open, revealing a man who appeared to be in his early 40s. His face was rough, weathered from years of hard work under the sun. He had the kind of build you'd expect from someone who spent their days on a ranch. His hands were calloused, his expression weary, but when he saw Harris standing there, his face froze. "Officer Harris." Frank's voice was thick with confusion. "What's going on?" Harris knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy, but it had to happen. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice low and steady. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm here about your daughter, Emma," Harris said, watching closely for any change in Frank's expression. At the mention of Emma's name, Frank's shoulders stiffened. He glanced quickly over his shoulder as if expecting her to come running from another room, but when she didn't, his gaze snapped back to Harris, his eyes narrowing. "What about Emma?" Frank asked, his voice tinged with concern, but there was also a hint of defensiveness. Harris hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. I'm afraid your daughter has been through some difficult experiences at home, he began, his tone measured but firm. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Emma has been abused by your wife, Claire. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Frank didn't speak. He just stared at Harris, his eyes wide, like he couldn't process what he was hearing. No, Frank said finally, his voice shaking. That's impossible. Claire wouldn't do something like that. You must be mistaken. Harris felt his stomach tighten. This was the moment when Frank's world would start to unravel. I'm afraid it's true, Mr. Montgomery, Harris said, keeping his voice steady despite the storm of emotions he could feel rising inside of him. Claire has been hurting Emma for quite some time. We have evidence, Emma's testimony, the notes she left, and her injuries. It's all there. Frank took a step back, his face going pale. His hand gripped the door frame as if he needed something to steady him. No, Frank said again, more forcefully this time. You're lying. Claire wouldn't do that to my daughter. I know her. I've known her for years. Harris could hear the disbelief in Frank's voice, and he knew it wasn't just denial. It was shock. This was a man who thought he knew his wife, who believed in her completely. The idea that she had been capable of something so monstrous was shattering his entire world. I'm not lying, Mr. Montgomery, Harris said, his voice softer now. I wish I were, but this is the truth. I need you to understand. Emma has been living in fear. She needs you to believe her now. Frank's face crumpled, his eyes filled with pain, but there was still that flicker of doubt. How could I not know? How could I have missed this? His voice broke as he spoke, and for the first time, Harris saw a crack in the armor Frank had been holding up. She's my daughter. How could I not know? Harris didn't answer right away. What could he say? The truth was painful, and there was no easy way to explain it. Sometimes people didn't see the signs. Sometimes they were blinded by love or guilt or 1,000 other things that kept them from looking closer. You weren't here, Mr. Montgomery, Harris said gently. You weren't there when Emma needed you the most. Claire kept her hidden, kept her quiet, and now we're doing everything we can to make sure Emma gets the help she needs. Frank's eyes were distant now, as if he were struggling to understand the reality that had been laid before him. I don't know what to say. Harris placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer some semblance of comfort, but there was no easy fix for this. You don't have to say anything right now, Harris said, but you do need to get help. Emma needs you to be strong. She needs her father to believe in her. Frank swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. His world was falling apart, but Harris could see something in his eyes, something that told him Frank would come around. It wouldn't be easy, but he would do what needed to be done. I'll do whatever it takes, Frank finally said, his voice breaking. I'll make this right. Harris nodded, relieved that Frank was beginning to understand. We'll help you, Mr. Montgomery. We'll make sure Emma gets the support she needs, but she needs you now more than ever. As Frank stepped back to let Harris inside, Max remained by the door, his eyes sharp, watchful. The truth had come out, but the real work, helping Emma, healing the wounds that couldn't be seen, was just beginning. The evening was drawing to a close, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty ranch. Harris stood on the porch, his boots resting on the wooden steps, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets as he stared out over the land. The world seemed so still here, so quiet, but he knew it was only the calm before the storm. Frank had agreed to work with him, and that was a good start. Harris had seen the guilt in Frank's eyes, the regret, the disbelief. But that wasn't enough. It wouldn't be enough until Frank proved to Emma that he was there for her, no longer lost in the haze of denial. He had to show her that he was going to protect her. And that's what worried Harris the most. Emma needed stability. She needed safety. She needed to know that her father, the man who should have been her rock, was truly going to stand by her side. But Harris couldn't do it for him. He could only offer guidance, advice, and support. It was up to Frank to step up. The sound of a truck pulling into the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Harris turned and saw Frank's old pickup roll to a stop. The engine cut off, and for a brief moment, everything was silent again. The truck door opened, and Frank stepped out, his movements slow, almost hesitant. Harris met him at the bottom of the steps. There was still a visible tension in the way Frank held himself. He was trying to be strong for Emma, trying to piece his life together after everything that had shattered it. But Harris could see that it wasn't going to be an easy fix. Ready? Harris asked, his voice firm but gentle. Frank hesitated before nodding. I think so, he said, his words heavy with uncertainty. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Harris. I don't know where to start. You start with Emma, Harris said simply. You start by showing her that you believe her, that you're here for her. Ibunin. Ois. Uhaham. Frank looked down at his boots for a moment, his shoulders slumping. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know how to start making it right. I was so blind. Harris placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it reassuringly. You don't have to fix it all right now. You don't have to make everything perfect. You just have to be there for her. Frank gave a short, bitter laugh. I wish I had seen it sooner. I wish I had noticed when she started pulling away. I could have protected her, Harris. We can't change the past, Harris said, his voice low. But we can start with today. We can start by making sure Emma never feels like that again. Frank met his gaze, his eyes brimming with emotion. I won't let her down again. I swear. Harris gave him a nod of approval, but there was no time for more words. They had to move forward. They had to keep going, no matter how hard it was. They walked into the house together, the weight of the situation still hanging in the air. Max followed closely behind, the dog's presence a silent reminder that they were no longer alone in this. The door closed behind them, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, her small hands curled around a cup of juice. She didn't look up as they entered, her eyes focused on the table in front of her. But Harris could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself so tightly, as if she was trying to shrink into the chair. Frank stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at her, the weight of everything hanging between them. He took a step forward, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. Emma, he said softly, his voice full of emotion, I need you to listen to me. I know I wasn't there for you. I know I failed you, but I'm not going to let you down again. I'm so sorry for what happened. You didn't deserve any of it. Emma didn't look up. She stayed perfectly still, her face unreadable. Harris's heart broke for her. She was still so young, but so much of her innocence had been stolen from her. Frank took a deep breath and knelt down in front of her, his face just inches from hers. I don't know how to make it right. I don't know how to fix everything, but I swear to you, Emma, I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I will always be here for you from now on. For a long moment, Emma didn't respond. Harris could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him, and he wasn't sure if Frank's words were reaching her. But then, just as he was about to step in, Emma's small hand reached out. She placed it gently on Frank's arm, her fingers trembling, just slightly. Promise, she whispered, her voice so soft that Harris almost didn't hear it. Frank's breath caught in his throat, and he nodded quickly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I promise. I will never let anyone hurt you again. Emma's eyes met his for the first time, and Harris could see something change in her. It wasn't a full recovery, not yet, but it was a start. She nodded, the smallest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Frank reached out and pulled her into a gentle hug, his arms wrapping around her as if he were afraid she might disappear if he let go. Emma stiffened for a moment, but then she relaxed, her small arms slowly wrapping around her father. The room was filled with the quiet sound of them holding each other, the silence only broken by the soft sniffle Emma let out. Frank held her tighter, as if he were trying to hold on to the piece of his heart that he'd lost for so long. Harris stood back, watching the scene unfold before him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And it was the beginning of something better for Emma. Harris could feel the promise of something changing in that moment, the first step toward healing. Max, ever watchful, stood beside Harris, his head tilted slightly as he watched Frank and Emma embrace. The dog's tail wagged slowly, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond between them, the bond that could never be broken. Do you need anything else, officer? Frank asked, his voice still thick with emotion. But there was a new sense of determination in it now. No, Harris replied, his voice steady. You've already taken the first step. Now it's time to heal. With that, Harris turned to leave. But before he stepped out the door, he glanced back at Frank and Emma one last time. The father and daughter were still holding each other, their world beginning to rebuild from the pieces they had almost lost. Harris knew there was still a long road ahead, but this moment, this quiet, fragile moment, was the beginning of something important. Emma was going to be okay, and for the first time in a long time, she was surrounded by the love and safety she deserved. And that was enough. Subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more heartwarming stories of resilience and healing. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm, golden hues across the worn wooden table. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of pancakes. Harris stood in the doorway, watching as Frank and Emma sat across from each other, sharing a quiet breakfast together. It was a scene so ordinary, so simple, but it was the most important thing Harris had witnessed in a long time. After everything Emma had endured, after the heartache and fear, seeing her this calm, this at ease, was something he hadn't dared to hope for. She was no longer the terrified little girl who had handed him the bear, clutching a note begging for help. She was just a child again, in a way that felt right, the way she should have been all along. Frank was sitting across from her, his face softer now, his movements more measured. His eyes occasionally flicked to Emma, checking in on her without saying a word, just letting her know that he was there. He had taken the first step, and now it was about consistency, about showing her that he wasn't going anywhere. He had apologized, but his actions were the proof that mattered most. Harris watched them for a moment longer before stepping inside. His boots made a soft sound against the wooden floor, and both Frank and Emma turned toward him. Frank's face brightened slightly, and Emma smiled a little, a small, tentative smile that made Harris's heart swell with hope. "Good morning," Harris said, his voice light, a contrast to the heaviness of the past few days. "Good morning, Officer Harris," Emma said, her voice still quiet but no longer tremulous. She had a cup of juice in front of her, and she was poking at the pancakes on her plate, though her attention was mostly on Frank. Harris nodded and smiled back at her. He had seen so much progress in her already. The walls she had built up, walls of fear and mistrust, were slowly crumbling. But it wasn't an instant fix. Healing took time. Trust had to be earned, not just given. But this moment was proof that Emma was beginning to see the world through a new lens, a safer one. Frank stood up, wiping his hands on a towel before offering it to Harris. "Can I get you some coffee, Harris? You've been a big help. I can't thank you enough." "Coffee would be great," Harris replied with a small chuckle, taking the towel and wiping his hands. It wasn't the thanks that mattered, though. It was the change in Frank, the way he was stepping up as a father. He had a long road ahead, but Harris could see that Frank was willing to walk it. "So how's Emma been doing?" Harris asked as he took a seat at the table, looking between the two of them. Frank sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he sat back down. "She's been better. A lot better, actually. Still a little quiet at times, but we're working through it. I'm trying to be there for her, you know?" "I know," Harris said. He meant it. He had seen the progress firsthand. "But you have to remember, Frank, healing isn't linear. There will be days when it feels like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's normal. You just need to keep showing up. Keep proving to her that she's not alone." Frank nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to Emma. She had already returned to her pancakes, but there was a lightness to her now, something Harris hadn't seen when he first arrived. She wasn't so guarded anymore. It was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and she was slowly, tentatively, letting herself trust again. Do you think she's okay?" Frank asked, his voice barely a whisper. Harris took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "She's getting there. It's a process, but she's strong. You're both strong. It's just going to take time." "Yeah," Frank said softly. "Time." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Harris just let the silence sit between them. He could see that Frank was feeling the weight of the responsibility he now had, the weight of being the one to protect Emma, to make sure nothing like what had happened with Claire ever happened again. But there was also a determination in Frank's eyes. He was ready. He was stepping up. "Listen," Harris said, breaking the silence. "I know you've got a lot on your plate right now, but I want you to know that you're not doing this alone. Emma's got a whole team behind her. And if you need anything, if you ever need someone to talk to or need help, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here." Frank gave a small, appreciative smile. "I won't forget that. I won't let Emma down again." Harris stood up, his hand resting on the back of the chair. He gave Frank and Emma one last look, one that said everything he needed to say. They were on the right path now. It wouldn't be easy, but they had made it through the darkest part. There was light ahead, and that's all that mattered. "You're doing good, Frank," Harris said with a nod. "Keep it up." With that, he turned to leave. Max, as always, was waiting by the door, his eyes calm and steady. The dog had been a constant presence, just like Harris had been. A reminder that no matter how dark things got, there was always help. There was always hope. As Harris stepped out into the bright morning sunlight, he breathed in the fresh air, the weight of the case slowly lifting from his shoulders. It wasn't just the case that was resolved, it was the beginning of something better. Emma's future was no longer shrouded in fear and uncertainty. There was hope now, and hope was all a person really needed to begin again. Before getting into the squad car, Harris turned back for one last look at the ranch house. Frank and Emma were sitting together at the table, quietly talking now, the weight of their past still lingering but now in the process of healing. For the first time, Emma wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor. And more importantly, she was loved. As Harris started the engine, Max sitting calmly in the passenger seat, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. He had done his job, but more than that, he had witnessed something truly extraordinary, a family beginning to heal. Thank you for following this story to its conclusion. It's not always easy to face the hard truths, but in the end, we see that hope and healing can find their way, even in the darkest of times. What do you think, though? How do you think Frank will continue to support Emma? What do you think it takes to truly heal from something so painful? Share your thoughts with us in the comments.